As a big fan of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, as someone who considers it their favorite game of the original trilogy, I've had it with the RE3 slander. And after being able to talk to Kazuhiro Aoyama, the director of RE3, I feel fairly well equipped to set the record straight on the game's origin. Any information I cite in this video is either verified by Aoyama-san himself or is complimentary and not contradicted by him. We hear it all the time that our love for RE3 Nemesis is wrong because it's a bad, rushed Resident Evil game, and that it's not even the true sequel. That title apparently belongs to Code Veronica. We're going to talk about both of these arguments in this video. Let's get one thing straight. RE3 Nemesis is a popular, well-selling entry in the series, loved by many. It sold at least 3.5 million copies in its day without the double-dipping benefit of re-release special editions. Yes, the sales of RE3 are lower than RE2, but it only got one release. The RE1 Director's Cut, put out a year after the original's release, boosted its sales by 1 million with a playable RE2 demo included, and then there was a DualShock version that added another 1 million. RE2 is obviously the mega-selling phenomenon, but it too got a DualShock release, adding another 800,000 units. No, RE3 only had the vanilla release. It isn't exactly fair to compare the total sales because of it, but it sold very well for $19.99 on a single console. Its influence was strong enough to make it the first character story somewhat adapted by the movies, making Jill and Nemesis big parts of Resident Evil Apocalypse, and Nemesis himself became a much more well-known villain associated with the series than the Tyrant or William Birkin, earning him a spot as a playable character in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 12 years after he debuted. When someone wants to disparage RE3, the most common attack they levy is arguably a lie at worst and a questionable distortion of the facts at best. It is that RE3 Nemesis was a rushed product and suffered because of it. For some context, RE1 came out in March of 1996, and the much-awaited sequel, RE2, was far into development when it was scrapped around February of 1997, leaving just 11 months between then and the January 1998 release date for the game we know and love. And sure, they still had general ideas to use, some room layouts, the character of Leon, but they threw out a lot of stuff and had to make a new game in less than a year. It came out great, as we all know, but we can see here that shakeups were happening during the development of Resident Evil games, and RE2 itself had its own kind of pressure during development. Nemesis got going in October of 1998, releasing in September of 99 in Japan, November in the States. That's 11 months compared to RE2's 11 months, plus a year of a lot of scrapped material. Of course, that is a significantly shorter total development time, and RE3 is a smaller game, but they were also working with an established formula at that point. Since it was originally conceived as a smaller spin-off title, they had set out from the beginning of the project to make it a single character story, as opposed to the two-character style of the first two games. And a short development time doesn't necessarily mean a sequel is going to be lacking, especially in the 90s when dev cycles were shorter and when you have a game built on a previous entry's foundation. Several of RE3's monster AIs were already in place for RE3, dogs, hunters, zombies, and the makers of RE3 didn't have to massively improve on the last game the way that RE2 did. They just had to do something original feeling with the foundation. And what they accomplished in terms of level design, art, animations, and cinematics in less than a year is impressive. RE2's dev team was about 45 people, while RE3's was originally only 20, but then it was expanded to 40 people once it was changed by Capcom to be an official numbered sequel. This is information that is publicly available and that I got from Aoyama-san himself. A trilogy of games on one system just feels right, doesn't it? The PlayStation RE trilogy. It's great. In my interview with Aoyama-san, he said that the order to change his game into an official sequel came in January of 1999, about 9 months before release, meaning the vast majority of development time was under the direction of Nemesis being an official sequel. This was not a half-finished spin-off that was shoehorned into being a sequel. I asked if the change from spin-off to official sequel was because of some contract Sony had with Capcom to put 3 numbered titles on the PlayStation, and he said he was not aware of any deal like that, and that he thinks it was more that Capcom decided a numbered sequel would just do better on PlayStation than somewhere else. because according to Aoyama-san, at this time, Capcom was developing Code Veronica, RE0, Nemesis, and another title planned to be RE3 that eventually became Devil May Cry. This is probably news to anyone listening because everyone always says Devil May Cry came from a cancelled early version of RE4. But according to the director of Nemesis, it was in fact a version of RE3 that was converted into DMC1, which makes sense given that DMC1 launched in 2001. He told me that the CGI team, originally assigned to the cancelled RE3 project and went on to work on DMC later, got moved to Nemesis for the time being so they could continue their work, and that's why the cutscenes of Nemesis ended up being so high quality for the time. He even told me that someone from the CGI team conceptualized the Nemesis himself. It wasn't a creation of the game team. Very importantly, I asked Aoyama-san if they had to make significant sacrifices to get the game out on time, since people accuse it of being rushed. And he said that while it was a short development time, and any game has to make sacrifices, the game they released is the game they wanted to make, and he's very proud of it. And now I'm gonna blow your mind. It is commonly believed that as a spin-off, Nemesis originally focused on a new character, and they later changed it to be Jill on Capcom's orders. The director of RE3 says that is not true, that they had always planned for Nemesis to center on Jill. There was no other character.
You could say that they probably thought about, should we have Jill or should we have some other character? They ended up choosing Jill, but yeah, to my knowledge, it was always Jill who was intended to be the protagonist.
So despite originating as a spin-off with a smaller team, budget, and development time, it ultimately ended up with a comparable team size to RE2 and enough time to make what they wanted since Capcom gave them a lot of support. Capcom took the project seriously after promoting it to official sequel. They had monthly meetings to check continuity with the other games, and in the end they released a campaign experience that feels complete for what it's offering. Sure, it only has one character, but it has branching paths, changing points of Nemesis ambushes, varying puzzle solutions, ways to affect the story, and a fun unlockable challenge mode called Mercenaries, which has become a series staple. While it doesn't have two separate character campaigns, does it have to? Sure, I wish more Resident Evil games did, but I don't think having one character makes it any less of a legitimate entry. RE7 isn't half a game, RE4 isn't half a game, Village isn't, well, we don't talk about Village. The campaign itself is arguably a grander experience than those of its predecessors, going from multiple maps of the downtown requiring about as much exploration as the RPD, if not more, to the clock tower, to the park, to the hospital, and the dead factory. Carlos is a playable character during the hospital section. The evolution of the Nemesis is compelling, seeing him start to transform after being injured during the train crash, and then later mutated by the toxic waste, turning him into a freakish, somewhat pathetic monstrosity only killable with a giant rail cannon. In my opinion, the fights with Nemesis are better than any boss fight in RE1, RE2, or Code Veronica. But now that we've brought up Code Veronica, some will argue even if RE3 is a complete and well-made experience, it's not the true sequel. They often say Code Veronica was originally planned as the true third game, which we just debunked here as Aoyama-san says neither Nemesis nor Code Veronica were planned to be RE3 at first. I believe that Nemesis deserves that 3 in its name, and I'm gonna lay out my reasons why. First, I don't think it matters what the original intentions were. What matters is what we got, and RE3 Nemesis is not a random side game that got slapped with a 3 on it. The trilogy ends with the return of Jill Valentine, who was at the time the true face of the series in many people's view, and it gave her character so much depth as we saw everything from her sense of style outside of work hours to the big heart she has as she cares for the innocent people around her. She doesn't take any crap, but she's not a stoic, boring badass either. She's far more interesting than Claire is in Code Veronica. And secondly, to me, Resident Evil is far more about Raccoon City than it is about Umbrella. That became the case once RE2 took place in the same city as RE1. I'm not saying you can't tell other stories in other places. I actually like Code Veronica's story and the evolution of Umbrella's experiments. But to close out a trilogy, keep it at home and finish what you started. By that, I mean the fate of Raccoon City and its citizens. In the endings for RE2, we get Leon saying,
"It's up to us to take out Umbrella."
Which goes absolutely nowhere since he disappears until RE4, and Claire says,
"Chris, I have to find you."
Which leads into Code Veronica. And does this not sound more like the beginning of a spin-off? Claire going halfway across the world to an island looking for her brother? I'm happy to consider it the true RE4 at that point, but not before Raccoon City is resolved. Claire's adventures at the military base with Chris and Wesker feel as much like their own separate story as RE4 does, with Leon going to Spain and finding Ada there. It all feels like what comes after the Raccoon City story, right? So why wouldn't the end of the Raccoon City story be considered the final game in the trilogy? Staying in Raccoon City for RE3 just makes sense, because at the end of RE2, the much bigger question, apart from what Leon and Claire are gonna do, is what the hell are they gonna do about this city overrun with zombies and the likely thousands of people trapped and needing help? Raccoon City is the Resident Evil location. RE3 Nemesis is the game that closes the book on this poor city destroyed by a greedy bioweapons company. The place we'd spent several years in as children and devastated us with a nuclear missile that wiped out everything. It was epic, it was sad. It broke my heart as a fan to see the city destroyed. And it made a lot of sense for the story. We started on PlayStation in this city and we ended it there. Doesn't it just feel right to say the Raccoon City trilogy? Imagine if they hadn't concluded what happened here, if we just flew overseas with Claire for her side adventure and left the fate of Raccoon City up in the air. That's not okay. And in my talk with Aoyama-san, I learned that when Nemesis was being developed as a spin-off at first, they didn't have plans to blow up the city yet. That came later, after it was decided to make it an official sequel. If Nemesis hadn't become RE3 officially, would we have ever gotten closure to the events in Raccoon City? At the end of our talk, the director of Nemesis asked what's going on with Resident Evil these days, and I talked about the reveal of RE9, that we're going back to Raccoon City even though it was destroyed. I asked him if the intention of RE3's ending was that the city was supposed to be completely gone, as stated in the ending narration that says it was wiped off the map. And he said yes, their intention was that the city was destroyed. Then I showed him that RE9 is retconning RE3's ending to say only part of the city was destroyed, and much of the city is left standing, ready for us to revisit. His reaction to that was interesting. I'll leave the details out of the video for professional courtesy. I'll just say he was curious if time travel was involved. Lending more credibility to Nemesis being the true sequel is the fact that it was also more of an in-house project than Code Veronica, which was largely outsourced to Tokyo-based company Nextech, and it shows. The combat in Code Veronica feels worse than the PlayStation trilogy. The enemy AI is worse. The environments are artistically less compelling. The room-to-room musical themes are lacking in comparison. I think it's a good game, but its flaws make sense when you learn it was an outsourced project. So if we're going to talk about which game deserves the official title of Resident Evil 3, maybe it should go to the one that was actually made at Capcom. Story-wise, if we're being honest, Code Veronica is the game where Resident Evil jumped the shark and entered the realm of silliness, which is another reason to not consider it the ending of the trilogy. RE1, 2, and 3 are fairly grounded stories about bio-experiments, betrayal, corporate espionage, monstrous assassins, freakish mutations, and zombie outbreaks in an American city. The villains are believable and down-to-earth. They don't comically laugh like maniacs like they do in Code Veronica.
I so want to enjoy this.
There are no ghosts, no psychic phenomena, there are no creature abilities that demand a massive suspension of disbelief. It's a believable story about monsters. Code Veronica took the grounded characters of the original games and started turning them into anime characters. Wesker's running up walls and punching monsters in the X version of Code Veronica. This is where it crossed the line. Wesker shouldn't even be here. He was dead in the original game, dying horribly at the hands of Tyrant or dying in the generator room, depending on the ending, and then blowing up along with the mansion. He was dead! Code Veronica brings him back, retconning his death, officially entering comic book territory. And people are basically magic now. Not only is Wesker back, but the T-virus gives him the ability to teleport, which we see at full ridiculousness in RE5. And we've got Alexia over here engulfing herself in flame and throwing fire blood at you during the boss fight. It's essentially magic at this point. People have tried to tell me that Wesker's not actually teleporting, he's just running really fast. Yeah, okay, fine, he's not teleporting. He's just running as fast as the Flash, and that's totally scientific. This lady's throwing blood that instantly ignites into fire, and you can cite bombardier beetles all you want. I'm not seeing insects in nature that can ignite their entire bodies into fire so much that their eyeballs would be boiling, and they're just totally fine. Call it magic, or psychic abilities, or just really, really exaggerated science. It doesn't matter. This stuff is incredibly far-fetched compared to the original plot. And getting me to believe this is realistic science is like getting me to believe Cyclops shooting lasers out of his eyes is a legitimate prediction of evolutionary theory. If Resident Evil 1 had been made by the Code Veronica people, Jan would be spitting fire out of his mouth because he was spliced with DNA from a dragon egg. Just like how in RE0, there's the guy controlling leeches. I have no time for people trying to justify this by talking about mimicry in nature. The guy has hundreds of leeches perfectly resembling an upright walking human in seconds, even creating a suit and tie out of nothing. This is magic. If you're okay with it, just say it, but don't try to say this is science. And that about wraps up my points on the issue. I think I've made it crystal clear why Resident Evil 3 Nemesis deserves that name. The dedicated development and the resources it got from Capcom once it was decided to be a sequel, the outsourcing of Code Veronica and how its plot jumped the shark, the importance of concluding the Raccoon City storyline and deciding the city's fate, the great character development of RE1's star Jill Valentine, the quality of content included in the RE3 package, the influence of RE3's events and characters on pop culture, the strong sales numbers, and feeling at home on the PlayStation. If you like this video, I have a lot more on Resident Evil and other survival horror titles like Silent Hill, Signalis, Chronos the New Dawn, Crow Country, and more. Have a look around, consider joining my Patreon so I can keep up this kind of work, and thanks for watching.